of The Ohio State University. Belinda was also a student and later a staff member with World Campus Afloat, a shipboard university that traveled to Asia, Africa, and Southern Europe. And her early exposure to global issues and her love of art has deeply influenced her work throughout her life. Her past vocations include using dream work as a tool for exploring consciousness, co-founding, and I'm probably going to say this wrong, co-founding the Kuyu Munge Institute with Felicitas Goodman and teaching that method, which uses breath, sound, and ritual body postures to access the world of spirits. And establishing the Enneagram Institute of Central Ohio in 2000 to train professionals in the use of the Enneagram, talking too fast, system for facilitating personal and professional development. Her current work and the subject of her talk today is the Great Circle Alliance, of which many of you have cards that talk about it. In 2021, Belinda and Marcus Boroughs founded the Great Circle Alliance, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to offer public programs and exhibits to raise awareness of the ancient monumental indigenous sites of Ohio. Their work includes a residency for contemporary Native artists to bring an indigenous presence of the once vibrant, sophisticated culture of 2,000 years ago to us now. So please, one other thing before we welcome Belinda on stage. If your cell phone is on and it goes off during this talk, you owe $10, either to the library or to the Great Circle Alliance. So check your phones now, turn them off, put them to silent, do whatever you need to do, but let's hear no bing, bong, whatever. Thank you. Now, let's welcome Dr. Belinda Gore to the stage.
Yes. Thank you. Am I live? Yes. That was quite an introduction, Deb. I think she went back all the way back to high school and brought me forward. But can you turn up my volume? Yeah. So, am I going louder? Can you hear me now? All right, good. Thank you. There's a little bit of a reverberation, though. Well, we'll see what we can do with this. Thank you all for being here today. I have a new passion in my life when I'm supposed to be retired, which is the Great Circle Alliance. I think that the information that was sent out talked about our topic today as being the World Heritage Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks. And I will be talking about that. I want to be really clear, however, that I am not an employee of the Ohio History Connection that has spearheaded the process of the earthworks becoming a World Heritage Site in September of 23. So I'm giving you a different perspective, and the purpose, as you heard, for the Great Circle Alliance is integrating art and heritage as we learn more about really this very amazing place we live. Many of you probably know that UNESCO is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And in 1978, UNESCO decided to establish what they called the World Heritage Program. And it is for the preservation and registering of sites around the world. You may know that Ohio's Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks is the only World Heritage Site in Ohio and is only number 25 in the entire United States. So we're in a prestigious company. You may also know that the World Heritage Site is actually what's called a serial site, and there are 8 earthworks that exist over a 90-mile area. Our focus is on the Newark earthworks, which you may know as the Great Circle and the Octagon, which just January 1st became a public site after having been a golf course since, I believe, 1910. So a number of us were there celebrating on New Year's Day. The point of World Heritage is to honor sites that have particular criteria. And it was proposed that the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks are masterpieces of human creative genius. And we'll be looking at how the Newark earthworks particularly fulfills this description. And also, the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks bear a unique testimony to the tradition of the indigenous Hopewell culture of 2 millennia ago. So the dossier that was presented to UNESCO is really a work of art, and there are some individuals in the process of translating that into a large coffee table book. Some of the language that was utilized is that these earthworks are exceptional for their enormous scale, geometric precision, and astronomical alignments, and they're described as masterpieces of human genius. Part cathedral, part cemetery, and part astronomical observatory. Before 10 years ago, how many of you had been to the Newark earthworks? I'm impressed. I had not, which I'm embarrassed to say, and it was because I hadn't that my friend Marcus, who is from New Zealand, asked me about it, and I couldn't tell him about it. And so the outcome of all of that conversation was that we established a nonprofit to appreciate these really beautiful sites. It's extraordinary, though, because before about a year ago, you could go most days and you might not see anybody, or you might see somebody walking their dog. I hear from people in Newark that when they were growing up, they rode their bicycles over the mounds. But a deep appreciation of the masterpiece that's literally in our backyard hasn't been appreciated until very recently. So here's a map. Squire and Davis, they weren't archaeologists, but in the 1800s, they went around a lot of Ohio to make maps of important sites. And this area is about a 4 square mile circle. You can see the octagon and circle up at the top. But other than that, if you're driving out to visit them, you'll realize that Route 16 goes right through there, and we're in Heath, so Route 79 comes through, and there are housing developments and strip centers around what was once a ceremonial gathering place. This earthwork, however, is part of a large number of significant earthworks. So not just mounds, because there are mounds everywhere. You know, we have Mound Street in Columbus, there's Mound Street in Cincinnati. There were mounds all over this area, the Ohio River Valley. Some of them were excavated for soil for farmland. Some were dug into and artifacts removed before they were plowed over. But you can just appreciate that from the top, what is that, your right, yeah, where you see the earthworks, the Newark earthworks, how it's part of something much larger. And the darker labels indicate the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks. And I just put a slide to say thank you to Scenic for the Traveler's Guide to Ancient Ohio, which is where I got the previous slide. John Hancock is a retired professor of landscape architecture from the University of Cincinnati. He's been very active in creating the dossier and other parts of promoting the World Heritage designation. And he wrote something that we think is pretty important, that the earthworks of the Ohio Valley reflect a spatial conception that is fundamentally beyond the grasp of the modern Western imagination. Well, first of all, there are a lot of people who say, what? Something from 2,000 years ago is beyond the grasp of our imagination? But in fact, yes, because the outlining the presence of these earthworks, first of all, speaks to relationship on the ground, but then it is relationship between the earth and the sky world. That what this spatial conception is that we are part of the cosmos, and that these ancestors from 2,000 years ago understood that significantly enough to bring forward their engineering ability, their understanding of astronomy and of geometry, to make something that is so precise that, as we'll see in a few moments, we can look at the northernmost rising of the moon on a specific day, 18.6 years from each other. And they did all that without computers and without earth-moving equipment and a lot of the things that we believe are essential to be able to create something magnificent. These are people who lived without artificial light. And we take it for granted in so many ways. That's like, oh yeah, no electricity. But at night, this is the night sky. And it's mind-boggling and significant. In the worldview of the people who built the mounds, the sky world gave us a sense of order because they could be predicted. The movements in the heaven were predictable. The earth and the waters of the earth were considered chaotic, not in a bad way, but because this is the raw material out of which life emerges. Scientists sometimes say that life on planet Earth began with lightning striking the oceans, creating cellular beings that then developed into all of the various organic forms on the earth. We grew in the waters of our mother's wombs. So fertility is considered chaotic, and the sky world is what offered order. These people particularly were interested in the moon. And when I say these people, I want to be clear. We talk about Hopewell people, and that's not accurate. We even talk about a Hopewell era, and that's not accurate either. That precisely we would speak about a Hopewell culture. We don't know what these people called themselves. Hopewell was the last name of Mordecai Hopewell, whose farm was the site of the first mound that was excavated, and objects were dug up and compared with earlier objects from the Adena culture. Now, the Adena didn't call themselves that. You probably know Adena is the name of the estate that Thomas Worthington established. He was the first governor of the state of Ohio. So he had an Adena mound, one of those big conical shaped mounds, like in Marietta in the famous cemetery there. There are lots of Adena mounds around the state. And then when the mounds became more earthworks or having perimeters to establish a space, then that was the shift to the Hopewell culture. So we're talking about people whose names we don't know, and we call them mound builders, but for a while that wasn't a very popular name, because some people, in fact, a Dr. Forster, who was the chair of a scientific organization in Chicago in the late 1800s, said it was preposterous to think that Native Americans, the Indians, could be sophisticated enough to build these massive earthworks. And so they decided that it might be the lost tribes of Israel, or it might be giants, or even aliens. And I bring that up because, think about it, the society was more willing to think about aliens coming to build the earthworks than to believe that the indigenous people of this land were sophisticated enough to be able to do this job. So not only were they interested in the moon, but they were interested in the movements of the moon. And as we see with, the octagon tracks the 18.6 year cycle of the moon rises and moon sets. Now, there's a treat for you, because on March 7th at the Octagon, you have the opportunity to go see the northernmost rising of the moon, that we're at the 18.6 year point. I found this bit of information too that I want to share with you, because the octagon obviously has 8 sides, and there is a square defined by linking those sides. And each of those angles points to a particular rising or setting of the moon. And somebody thought to say, there are people who say, well, that could be just random. And they calculated that there is 1 in 100 billion chance of creating an octagon randomly that captures as many standstill alignments as the Newark octagon. I'm sharing these things with you, hoping to generate or fan the flames to the wonder that we all feel as we walk into these spaces. I've had people come on our tours who say, what's the big deal? It's really just kind of a mound of earth in a circle, and so we need to educate ourselves and everyone else to be able to talk about what a wonder the Newark earthworks really are. Brad Lepper, who some of you know was the chief archaeologist of the Ohio History Connection, describes the sites as being like a vast machine or device designed and built to unleash primordial forces. to represent and reproduce the larger cosmos, providing a context in which ceremonies could occur, allowing participants to participate directly in cosmic rhythms. The point is, people came from sometimes all over North America at particular times to be able to be in this space because it is reflecting patterns in the sky world and therefore activating primordial forces, as Brad says, that allow us to be in that field of energy to affect us, because humans are made of the earth, but also of the sky energy, which is our breath. Now, to further appreciate the wonder, you see that the square at the octagon is in yellow, and the circle at the great circle is in yellow. And that indicates that the area of each of those two forms is exactly the same. Similarly, the circle, observatory circle at the octagon, is blue, just like the blue square, which was called Wright Square. There's not very much left of it. If you've taken one of Jeff Gill's tours, you know there's like a little corner of what was left of Wright Square, are of exactly the same area. The red circle around the great circle is the same as the red outline of the Wright Square, because the perimeter of each is exactly the same. So when we talk with John Hancock about spatial observations and going beyond our imagination, these are people who were very precise. And even better, here's the Octagon Earthworks, and High Bank's works is in Chillicothe. And if you draw a line straight through that middle section of both, they make a 90-degree angle, 60 miles apart. These are people who understood the geometry of the land they lived on and wanted to be part of something larger than themselves. Now, how did they do this? One basket at a time. Earth, we believe, was moved in baskets that were about 1 cubic foot. So I didn't bring my cubic foot, but you get about what that is, to fill that up. Anybody know about how many cubic feet went into making the Newark Earthworks? Between 6 and 7 million. That's a lot of baskets to fill and walk over and deposit. If you put a cubic foot side by side and headed west with a line, it would go beyond Denver. So we start to recognize what an undertaking this was. And they did it so precisely that every 18.6 years, the moon's going to come up right there. You know, it's not that, yeah, well, you know, kind of in this area. It was very precise. So, giving you some appreciation for why the earthworks, and particularly the Newark Earthworks, are considered worthy of being a World Heritage Site. Marcus and I put together the Great Circle Alliance because we wanted to empower, we wanted to empower Ohio's communities, artists, and the environment, which basically means the land, and all of us that live on the land. GCA delivers, I've got the new version and the old version. I'll read from yours. By advancing educational and interpretive public programs. So We want all of us to keep learning more and more so that we are appreciative. And interpretive just means that we learn to understand how it all works together. Public programs that integrate Ohio's ancient Hopewell Ceremonial Earthworks and the knowledge that is embedded in the land. GCA also utilizes these World Heritage sites to restore the voices of contemporary Native American artists whose ancestors were forcibly removed from their tribal homelands in Ohio in the 1830s. Some of you may know that we have no federally recognized tribes in the state of Ohio, even though this was once home to anywhere between 49 and 57 tribal groups. There were 7 major tribes at the time of removal. There are no federally recognized lands in Ohio. And in working with some artists who are part of a residency that we're doing, a young woman who's Eastern Shawnee but lives in Washington State said that she was talking about her trip here as an artist in residence to the board of directors at the senior center. And one man said, "Oh, I'm from Ohio." He said, "But I didn't know there were any Indians in Ohio. I mean, there aren't any casinos." I mean, this was like last month, so it's like, oy. And we decided that art is a way for people to relate beyond even vocabulary, across cultures, in an emotional way as well as an intellectual way. And we set about doing a number of projects. The first one is a storybook trail that is no longer up right now at the Great Circle, but it's a series of 10 panels based on a book written by John Lau, who's Potawatomi and who is also the director of the Newark Earthworks Center at the Ohio State University campus in Newark. So John had written this book. We've worked closely with John in the development of the Great Circle Alliance, and we asked him if we could sort of translate his book into these panels just with a few cartoons and a little bit of information, because we installed this in September of 2021. What was going on? Well, COVID made it such that people couldn't gather to go to museums or even tours. And so we designed this so that parents could take their children, walk around the Great Circle, understand what it was all about. And in fact, while it was written for kids, we found that a lot of adults were learning a lot from those bits of information. Once we were able, we started having tours at the Great Circle, and we would sit around under this beautiful big tree, talk about the information that I've shared with you, as well as looking at examples of flint and pottery from the Hopewell culture and so forth. And then eventually taking people to the interior of the Great Circle, and this is standing on the Eagle Mound, which was not a burial mound, was rather for the purpose of, it was called a funerary mound, for the purpose of dealing with the bodies of significant people who had died. And then generally the bones were taken to the burial area. Eventually, the structure that was at the Eagle Mound was burned intentionally so that it was wood, obviously, and could be returned to the earth. So now we have this earthen structure that some people think looks like an eagle, and in a way it does, but since we don't have an outline of it, I'm not going to make a big point of that. What we realized, though, is that not a lot of people could come with us on tours, so we created an exhibition that was first at the Works in Newark and then has toured to other museums around the state, from Marietta to Hamilton to St. Clairsville, and it's still available for touring. We called it Mounds, Moon, and Stars, the legacy of Ohio's magnificent earthworks. And this is what the exhibition looked like at the Works. What we found is that the Field Museum, which is where Moorhead, who dug up a lot of artifacts in Chillicothe, took them to Chicago for the Chicago Exposition in 79, I'm not really sure the date. And they said, okay, afterwards, what are we going to do with them? They left them there, and that's how the Field Museum started. So they wouldn't let us take any of the artifacts on loan to bring back to Ohio, but they did let us use some of the photographs. And you see that, I don't know, spider-looking structure in the back. We had some of them enlarged and made into cutouts. And that was a small copper piece of jewelry that is made large on the wall. What we found extraordinary is that these people who could create a 4 square mile earthen precinct could also create very elegant, small ceremonial objects and jewelry. So we have the eagle, the eagle's claw, which looks like this, which is actually part of the story of what happens when we die and go to the sky world. The round piece is a piece of jewelry. There are a couple of effigy pipes, and I'll show you more of those. And then down at the bottom in copper is a swan with its neck back. And so the swan, too, is part of the story of the path of souls, of what happens to us when we die. We included in the exhibition things like examples of pottery. You see across lined up are examples of flint from Flint Ridge, which is just east of Newark. Flint Ridge has evidence of human presence. How many years ago? 14,000 years ago. There were humans coming to Flint Ridge to dig up pieces of flint to make into knives, things that could be used to skin or deal with skins, take the hair off skins, a variety of very useful objects. And so this was an important area. It was also an important area because Licking County may have been named for the salt licks that are particularly prevalent in that area. So a lot of game came. So here's food, here's flint for knives. But people also came for the ceremonial aspect, and you really can't see the obsidian very well, but that's from as far away as Colorado, mica, copper from the Great Lakes. So we have evidence that people made pilgrimages to this area on a regular basis, and they took this flint back with them. And this flint is special because when you put it in the fire, it makes it more malleable, but it turns these beautiful, brilliant colors like the red that you see. So down at the bottom, there's a sort of a triangular piece that might be what flint looks like if it's not treated with heat. And then we get all these other beautiful examples. Another thing that's characteristic of the mounds in the Ohio River Valley is these effigy pipes. They are particularly prevalent at Tremper Mound north of Portsmouth. I think they found a cache of like 120 of these pipes in one place. And so they're little, you know, the effigy pipes are like about this big. And if you see in front of the crow or raven, on the platform, there's a little hole at the front. And that's where you would put a reed. And up at the top, if you can see, there's an indentation in the back of the bird, and that's where you would put the tobacco that they raised. And so you would smoke the pipe, but think about then what's happening. You're looking right in the eyes of this bird, or there are effigy pipes that are beavers, that are dog-like coyote-type looking. There's even a female head with cat ears that I think is indicative of the underwater panther, who was a powerful spirit who protected the waters. But in any case, the presence of these effigy pipes lets us know they had clans that highlighted or had totems that were animals who lived in the area. And indigenous people around the world say the animals are our older brothers and sisters. They've been here longer than we have, and we can learn from them. So instead of feeling superior, what we would do if we were part of these groups 2,000 years ago is that I might be in the Crow clan. And so I would especially learn what Crow had to teach my people. And when we were having ceremony, I would smoke the Crow pipe and probably have some visionary experiences that would teach me more that I could then share with my tribe. There are also figures such as this one that was excavated at the Newark Earthworks Great Circle. It's technically called the Ray figure, W-R-A-Y, but informally called the Bear Shaman of Newark. You see that the shaman has a bear head. I don't know if you can see that the hands are actually slipped into bear paws, and you can see the claws, but it's a very specific posture. One hand is behind the head, the knees are bent, the feet are pressed against a platform. As Deb was introducing me, you may have remembered that for a number of years I worked with an anthropologist, Felicitas Goodman, who explored the presence of ritual postures in the artworks of indigenous people around the world from as long ago as 36,000 years ago. And I believe, and I'm speaking only for myself, that this is a ritual posture that perhaps may have been taught to the shamans to assist in what their activities were as part of the ceremony that took place here. There's a basically two-dimensional head in the shaman's lap. You can't see very much except the earplug that's kind of between his knees, and then what's between his knees is hair. Some people thought that was a severed head. These folks could really handle 3D pretty well. So I think if they wanted to put a 3D head in his lap, they would have made it that way. I'm not sure what it means, other than sometimes in the preparation for dying, the head was severed from the rest of the body so that the skull was preserved separately. There's a lot we don't know about these people. And I'm sharing this with you just to help you hopefully be curious and recognize that there's still a lot for us to learn. when we put the exhibition Mounds, Moon, and Stars together, we wanted to give evidence of the indigenous worldview, which is, I don't know if we want to call it generic, but that there is a worldview that is shared by most indigenous people around the planet. And one part of that is what we talked about earlier, that there is a sky world, there is a beneath world, the earth and the waters, and then there's the human world. And so I found this wonderful lithograph at, thank you very much, the Schumacher Gallery that is by Roy Vickers, is a First Nation artist, still alive. And if you look closely, you see that in the orange, yellow, and blue, there is the stylized head of the eagle. If you see at the very top, and it's hard to see, that eagle has a different face, and it is the eagle spirit. But then if you go below the red into the dark blue, you see the whales, who are the creatures of the waters. And so those whales are giving the presence of the water world. Here's the human world and the three middle ones, and then the spirit world is represented at the top. And if you don't know anything about that worldview, you can look at this and say, wow, that's a very striking print. But there's a lot more to it. If we go to a different landscape, to the American Southwest, this is a Navajo weaving, borrowed, thank you very much, from the Kennedy Museum at The Ohio University. And it is Mother Earth, Father Sky. You see that she has the sacred plants coming from her, and he has the sun and the moon and the stars in the darkness of his body. And the rainbow serpent encloses them. So, same worldview, very different presentation. And then finally, this is a very contemporary work by Alyssa Hinton, who is a Tuscarora Osage artist who lives in North Carolina, and it is of a mound. And I can't make it big enough for you, but you see in the middle where the red and yellow are the buried bodies of the ancestors. But above that is a fetus. It is the restoration or the renewal of the ancestors. I appreciate her work quite a lot, and I bought this print in order to be able to know that we'll always have this available to us. So this was all about our project with the exhibition, Mounds, Moon, and Stars. And then because I'm an alumna of Otterbein, I was on a mailing list that said that Carrie Newman in the black hat was around because he had an installation at one of the museums at Otterbein, and he really would like to come visit one of the earthworks, and would somebody be willing to give him a tour? So we volunteered, but so did John Lau, who's the director of the Earthworks Center. And Carrie was so moved, he said, if you ever do get this artist residency going, let me know. So sure enough, we invited him to be our inaugural Native American artist in residence. Carrie is a brilliant artist and also a teacher, a philosopher. He is a professor at the University of Victoria in Canada. And he was here in the spring, left at the end of June. And some of you may have been able to visit his exhibition, which is now on view at the Denison Museum in Granville. I can't speak Kwakiutl, so I can't tell you how to say the title, but it means driven away, returning home. And he created an installation. This is a small room at the Denison Museum that on 3 walls are panels. And these panels have the footprints and the handprints of people and animals who were driven away and are returning home. I encourage you to go see this. It will be on view until June. But after Carrie, we had another artist residency, Recovering Ohio's Indigenous Voices, bringing 3 artists from Ohio's removed tribes. That is, tribal people who don't live in Ohio anymore, but their ancestors did. One of them is Holly Margell, who is from the Eastern Shawnee tribe, a photographer. And she has used herself as a model. Some of you recognize the red hand over the mouth is an indicator of the movement toward recognizing missing and murdered Indigenous women and children and Two-Spirits, LGBTQ people, because on the reservations there aren't enough resources to track down the murders. Other police say that it's not within their purview. And 97% of the women who've been murdered were murdered by people not on the reservation. So it's a issue that Holly's bringing forward. This is Danny Tipman of the Miami tribe. She's a basket maker. And this is a picture of her stripping materials to make baskets large and small. And then Travis Mamade, who is Seneca Cayuga, lives in Oklahoma, is an artist, but also his father's Kiowa, and he has a background in traditional singing and drumming. On our YouTube channel, Great Circle Alliance, you can hear an interview to professors from Denison, interviewed and recorded Travis's drumming. We also have most of the hour-long presentation these 3 artists gave at Brindou in Granville in October. We're currently raising money to bring them back for an exhibition. As some of you who follow the news know, that the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities are putting at least their resources on pause. And we're scrambling. So we're very happy to tell people about what we're doing, to encourage you to support us if you feel so moved, to share information with other people who may care about what we've been talking about today. So thank you very much. I could talk for the rest of the afternoon, but I promised I wouldn't. So thank you. Yes.
For questions, let me come to you because we will not be able to hear you without the microphone. So Vicki, you're on.
What do you think they smoked in the pipe? Was it
Tobacco.
Did they have hemp or?
No, tobacco, but my friend Kevin here grew his own tobacco on his land. The tobacco they grew was very strong. It undoubtedly had hallucinogenic qualities.
If I want to learn more, is there a really good book out there I can pick up?
What do you want to learn about? Yeah.
She wants everything.
Everything.
What's been found and where the
Yes.
book came from?
Yes. First of all, you can go to our website to kind of get a beginning. There are a variety of books, and none of them, to my mind, has a succinct story. So there's part of the story in, what's the fat orange book that came out a couple of years ago?
We have a mound builders book that we bought at Cahokia in
yes,
Illinois.
There are a couple of books that say the mound builders. There's a good, I think it's just called the Newark Earthworks, which is a series of essays from talks that were given 12 years ago, but there's a lot of great information in that. So if you don't mind somewhat scientific reading, that's a great place to start.
What again?
The Newark Earthworks. There are two books called The Mound Builders.
You'll be next.
And I'm sorry that my mind is just, I can't think of the names of the authors.
Yeah, so I see the mounds, I hear how many baskets it took per mound. I'm just wondering, where was the earth, from where was it excavated? Shouldn't there be dips in the landscape?
Well, yes, at the Great Circle, so the circle has an opening, and when you enter, then there's what some people call a moat. Think about, you come into this, the landscape was all prairie, there weren't trees. The outside of the circle, they had gone quite a distance to get red mud on the outside. Then you come in, and the interior was a gold ochre earth, and there's a moat that had water in it. And so that moat, that you could use earth from that. There's a barrow area to the northeast of the Great Circle, so they got the soil from right there. The walls are 8 to 14 feet high. And so the Great Circle didn't take 6 million baskets, but the octagon and everything else combined. So there was quite a lot of land around through there, and they used the local land except for when they wanted color. And I think either the red or the gold, they went as far as Buckeye Lake, which is 20 miles, to be able to harvest that.
Hi, thank you for your sharing and for helping to form the Great Circle Alliance, the nonprofit around
Thank you.
education, and especially the importance of preserving what is still there. My question is mostly around the bear shaman, the Ray figure that you
Okay.
had shared. I'm curious what you had listed a woman who is studying the different prayer figures, and I didn't note her.
Yes, well, Felicitas died in 2005. Her last name is Goodman. I've written a few books about it, and so has her book is Where the Spirits Ride the Wind.
Okay.
Or you can look on my website, which is belindagore.com.
Wonderful, thank you. In looking at that figure, it made me think of, I'm currently in breath work, diaphragmatic breathing, physical therapy, and that pose is almost exact of what one of the exercises that I've been
Interesting.
given for breathing into my lower diaphragm, my whole spine. And yeah, it just made me think a lot. So thank you for sharing, and I'll look up more.
Great, thank you.
I just want to mention the website, Dr. Belinda Gore. I think it's .com. No, it's
belindagore.com.
belindagore.com. So lots of resources are there.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. I'm just wondering. You mentioned that we could get a tour, Jeff.
Well, there are lots of tours available. So the Ohio History Connection does tours of both the Octagon and the Great Circle, Wednesday through Sunday at noon. The Great Circle Alliance, Marcus and I do a tour once a month at the Great Circle. And if you're interested, you can go to greatcirclealliance.com and sign up for our newsletter. Jeff Gill is, I don't know if Jeff's retired as a minister, but he's a great storyteller and does tours of the area. And I don't know if it's just the Ohio History Connection that books those tours. So, but Jeff Gill, G-I-L-L, he lives in Newark.
Okay, thank you.
We have one from online. Somebody asked, was there any attempts to try and preserve the mounds that were in Central Ohio?
I'm not sure I understand the question because these are the mounds that are in Central Ohio. The Newark Earthworks are. So ask the listener what, for something a little more specific. Okay? Yes. Okay, and then we'll do.
Hi, my name is Kevin Eigel, and I'm on the board of the Great Circle Alliance.
He was here last month.
I was also a speaker here last month, but anyway, I found out about this group several years ago, and I found it to be really interesting. I used to work in Granville like 25 years ago, and I used to eat lunch at these locations. If you've never been out there, I strongly encourage you to visit the Octagon and the Great Circle. They're not that far away. They're very amazing, especially as we're learning more and more about the details and the story. One thing I just wanted to mention, I'm in charge of fundraising for this group. So I would encourage you to tell people about it, especially if people want to support what they're doing, which I would encourage you to do. One of our initiatives is to hire a indigenous director of the organization. So that's our goal, and we'd like to do that in the next year or two. So just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
There was okay, I'll be right back.
We believe that this work ideally is led by a Native person, preferably from Ohio's removed tribes, and we would like to function as allies. We initiated all of this because there just aren't very many indigenous people in Ohio. By census, it's between 0.2 and 0.3% of the population identify as Native American. And so we're doing what we can to establish a foundation and then raise the money to hire an indigenous executive director.
I wanted to ask you, Belinda, I live just a lane up from the Jeffers Mound in Worthington. And so do you think that there was something very spiritual about under the ground, that so many of these mounds were placed in this part of the country, and knowing that, we always thought that there were communities around to support these mounds. That wasn't the case. It literally was a venue for them to come for ceremonial plus the work to establish these. So is something
a couple of things. That mound is an Adena mound.
Right.
So it's earlier, but it's right on the river. That rivers were the source of transportation, but they were also the entrance to the beneath world. So it was very important that sacred sites were close to rivers. What? Well, these? Oh, yes. Raccoon Creek and the whatever branch of the Licking River. There are 3 rivers that surround that area.
Has there been much carbon dating done around these areas?
Yes, and I'm not an archaeologist. Some of the carbon dating, you have to have carbon in order to do the carbon dating. And so I think the fires, for instance, that were in the funerary area of Eagle Mound, we know that they were built around 100 and 1 to 200 of the Common Era. People were still building mounds until about 400. Seems that the mound building stopped, but people lived in the area for another 200 years. But then there's been carbon dating done like at the Alligator Mound. But what we don't know is, was that from the original people who built the mound or later people who came there to do ceremony and built fires? Right.
We'll do a couple more questions.
I wanted to ask you about the Alligator Mound. I grew up in the area and have been up there. I know it's surrounded now by housing development, and it's small, but it's to me it was always really fascinating because it's very clearly, looks like an animal. Is it part of considered part of the Newark?
No.
Earth? Okay.
Alligator Mound is what's called an effigy mound, similar to Serpent Mound down by Peebles. And those are the only two effigy mounds that is in the shape of an animal. The developer who built all those big houses kind of made a deal that this little area would be preserved. Unfortunately, the deed to that property is held by the Licking County Historical Society. Unfortunately, from my point of view, the neighborhood is responsible for mowing, and it's really hard now to be able to tell the outline of the figure. We're working with another organization to hopefully do a project to remedy that. But as an alligator, how many alligators have you seen recently in Ohio? But there are two things. Early people in Pennsylvania were called Alligans, so that may have been part of it. Also, it may be a representation of the underwater panther, whom I mentioned earlier, and especially because the tail is in a nice spiral, not like an alligator tail.
Any other questions? Okay, 1 minute. Oh, Hope.
Yeah.
So Hope, here we go.
I hope you all have enjoyed Belinda because I think her organization is wonderful and the things that they have in mind are tremendous. And I hope that you go and explore the Great Circle and the Octagon in Newark. You might want to take a side trip over to the Flint Ridge, and you can see where they dug the flint out of the earth. And one of the fascinating things that I've learned about the Flint Ridge is that it has been known for eons, and early man really used it, but it didn't become a real site of attract a lot of attention until the Hopewell came. And you can see that the amount of flint that was removed was just a little bit until the Hopewell population and culture entered Ohio, and then it went way up. And as soon as the Hopewell culture decreased, so did the amount of flint that was removed.
Interesting.
And as you, because I've walked all this area, after you have been to the Newark sites, you might want to go down to Chillicothe and see the sites that are down in Chillicothe. And then don't forget Fort Ancient, which is over in Warren County. And you might want to do that on April 5th because you'll be real close because Doug Ptolemy is coming to Lebanon. And that's just a hot skip in the jump from Fort Ancient. And you are so right about how the borrow pits were from the inside of an installation instead of the outside. And so the early Europeans who settled this area thought this hilltop structure was for a fort, but in reality, how can you have a fort that has 32 entrances and the moats on the inside? So it's not a fort, it's a religious site that has a lot of meaning to the Hopewell people.
So thank you, Hope, and I appreciate the vote of confidence. You've been a great friend to the Great Circle Alliance, and we appreciate you. 2 bits of information that you have trivia that you can drop in your conversations. One is, do you know what the state gemstone is? Flint. Who knew we had a gemstone? And the state artifact is a pipe, not the one I showed you, but the Adena pipe from Adena in Chillicothe. And so, yes, Hope.
It was a archaeological site. It's sort of in the aqueduct, and it became that because fourth graders wanted it to be that way, but Bob was governor, so Bob decided to Bill.
Say again.
The sites that we've been talking about with the in Newark are the state's official Hopewell ceremonial sites. And a group of fourth graders in Newark decided that this ought to be the case and convinced the legislature that it should be so. And so they passed a bill and Bob signed it when he was governor. Now, one of the fourth graders happened to have a father who was a state legislator. So that might have helped. But in the governor's residence somewhere now, there is a picture, a beautiful picture of the Newark structure to honor that event.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you all. Great questions, great presence.